Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of a number of individuals who have made this event possible. First, I'd like to thank the candidates in attendance for being willing to participate and make themselves available. Candidate Steve Gottlieb strongly supported this event, but due to personal circumstances, was unable to join us tonight. When I planned this event, I made it my goal to reach out to all the U.S. Senate candidates that I could find. This included the two highest profile candidates, Sarah Gideon and Senator Collins. Senator Collins' campaign has informed me that they will not be participating in any events of this kind prior to the primaries in July. Sarah Gideon's campaign declined to attend, citing a scheduling conflict. In addition to the candidates, I'd like to thank the members of my board for their support and assistance, as well as the many individuals and employees within the university who have assisted in promoting and supporting this event. I'd especially like to acknowledge my co-lead for this event, Tamara Hunt, without whom it would not be possible. In addition to all of her efforts in getting us off the ground, Tamara has also agreed to be the moderator for tonight's event. She has extensive experience in hosting, participating in, and judging policy debates. She will ensure that every candidate gets heard.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good evening, everyone. Like you said, my name is Tamara Hunt. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and on behalf of the University of Southern Maine and the Muskie School of Public Service, I'm honored to welcome you and our panelists to the 2020 U.S. Senate Candidate Forum. Thank you for joining us. With control of the Senate at stake, the U.S. Senate race in Maine is one of the most important in the country. And although unfortunate circumstances have made this event look different than we initially envisioned, having to move online and all, the value of our dialogue remains the same. This evening, our four panelists running to represent Maine in the United States Senate will have the opportunity to answer questions submitted by USM students. Time permitting, there will be 5 to 7 questions asked in randomized round-robin fashion, each on domestic foreign policy issues. The candidates will have 2 minutes to respond. Jeremy will be giving hand signals when 10 seconds remain, and if candidates go to 10 seconds over the allotted time, he'll give this hand signal. If you would like to utilize our closed caption feature, please go to the link listed in the chat box below. If you have any questions regarding the closed captions, please direct message Jeremy. All question topics, forum rules, and agenda are provided to the candidates in advance. There will be a brief Q&A session available towards the end of our event if you'd like to leave a question in the chat box for one or more of the candidates to answer once the chat box is enabled later in the evening. If you do submit a question, please list your name, how to pronounce it, and who the question is intended for. We should wrap up around 8 p.m. But before we begin, let's have each of the candidates in alphabetical order by last name give us a quick 2-minute self-introduction and opening statement, starting with Tiffany Bond.
Hi. Looks like my video might have just a little bit of a lag. Not sure how we want to address that. I'm Tiffany Bond. I am a family law attorney in Portland, Maine, and I'm running for the Senate because our job interview is pretty screwed up. So in order to make some of the changes that I'd like to see, I've been working on finding ways to get money out of politics and get common sense into it. If you like what you have here today, I invite you to please not give me a penny, but instead invest in our community and find me online after this event to figure out how.
Thanks, Tiffany. Go ahead, Bree.
Hi, my name is Bree Kidman. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I agree with Tiffany. Our job interview process for the U.S. Senate and for most political offices isn't very good. The idea that the person with the most money is the most politically legitimate is one of the biggest problems with our system. And so our campaign is actively working to address that. We're actually using almost all of our campaign funds on mutual aid projects right now. And I'm excited to talk about some exciting progressive policies and ideas that we're supporting, and excited to be here. I think public forums are a really critical piece of what's working about our political process, if you can call something working, and really grateful to the folks who put this together today.
Thank you. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Savage, an independent candidate for the U.S. Senate seat of Susan Collins under ranked choice voting. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Please call me Lisa. I want to thank the USM Muskie School organizers for creating this opportunity to share my views and earn your votes in November. Your persistence and flexibility in the face of adverse conditions that have affected your education this spring is to be commended. I'm a teacher, an organizer, and a union negotiator, and I'm seeking to represent Maine in the U.S. Senate because I believe a better world is possible. I'm deeply concerned about climate, poverty, healthcare, and I have stopped believing that Maine senators represent the values and priorities of ordinary people. I would not vote, as they repeatedly have, for spending over half the discretionary federal budget each year on the Pentagon and its wealthy contractors. I would end endless wars and bring that money home to address urgent needs for housing and healthcare as human rights. Like most people in Maine, I want expanded Medicare for all to provide quality health care for all U.S. residents, a guaranteed $15 minimum wage, and a Green New Deal to create good jobs responding to climate crisis. I also want to end the student debt crisis and make public higher education debt-free. I want Congress to bail out the people, not Wall Street. I've lobbyist CEOs or the super PACs that launder corporate money, and the people of Maine can count on me to be their voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Betsy?
Hi, thank you so much to Jeremy and Tamara and to the USM School, Muskie School Service for doing this. It really is important. And I also thank my other candidates, my fellow candidates on this journey, because I think how we run is how we will govern. And I think these forums are really important. And I also hope that everyone here and everyone watching, I hope you are safe and healthy and your families are well and you have what you need. And if you have what you need and more than you need, that you're reaching out a hand to help everyone in Maine who does not have what they need right now during this terrible moment. You know, I think that we are in a moment. This pandemic is exposing the gross inequalities and the ways that our system does not work for so many people living in this state and in this country. And we have this opportunity now to take the issues that we have all been working, I know all of the candidates here and I have been working on for so long, to say these aren't just critical during a pandemic. This is the way forward, going forward in a new normal. So just a little bit about me. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My dad always said to us kids, you make sure you leave a place better than you found it. I think he meant to sweep the floor and make the beds. I thought he meant change the world. So I was like, okay, we're on it. So I started knocking on doors for the Equal Rights Amendment in 1978. I worked for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom on the military budget to curb the military budget and to end the nuclear arms race. I went to the commission to the Maine Women's Lobby, where the first thing I did was work on raising the minimum wage. Then the Commission for Women, where I helped write the first Family Medical Leave Act in the country. The national one was then based on Maine's, and then worked with a whole coalition of progressive groups to get money out of politics by drafting and passing the Clean Elections Act, the first public financing system for elections in the country. All of those things I did while raising 3 amazing daughters as a single mom. And I think we have this incredible opportunity. All of those things we were told were impossible. And then we made them possible by working together. This crisis has made us all, more people than ever, understand that the policies that we are talking about are the ones that are not going to just get us through this pandemic, but are going to move us forward. So I really look forward to hearing your questions and talking more about this. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Betsy. And thank you all for your willingness to participate in this event and your commitment to serve in the best interests of Mainers. Our first question of the night is provided by a USM graduate student studying social work and public policy. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted many of the failings of our healthcare system. As Senator, how would you respond to evidence of racial disparities and the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people of color? And what policies would you advocate for to improve healthcare access, affordability, and future responses to public health crises? And first up, we've got Lisa Savage.
Thank you, Tamara. Well, I think that the racial disparities that we're seeing in the effects of the COVID crisis are not a surprise, although they are very concerning. Having healthcare be accessible on the basis of how much a person can spend on healthcare has been a very poor system in the U.S. for decades, and it disproportionately impacts people of color who have generational effects of the white supremacist world that we live in and the lack of generational wealth that's passed down to many of them. So underlying health conditions, a lack of access to health care, many of these things could be addressed by a robust, expanded Medicare for All system where all U.S. residents receive quality health care, irregardless of how much they can afford to spend and regardless of where they live. I think that most Americans do support this, and the insurance company lobbies, the health insurers, have made Congress unable to pass such legislation. And I think that a key is to not take campaign donations from such entities, but to go into the Senate ready to represent what the people of Maine and the nation need. Children, grandmothers, moms, dads, they all deserve health care. Health care is a human right. And this is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We can certainly afford quality health care for everyone, including dental care, which is often left off of healthcare policies. It affects people's overall health, their ability to work. And we have a situation where people are going to the emergency room to get their health care. We can do better, and I know that the will of the people is there to do better. So that's one of my major motivations for running for this office. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And next we've got Bree.
So I agree that Medicare for All would solve a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now. Marginalization that impacts access to wealth in this country under the system that we have now necessarily impacts access to health care. Your health care is only as good as what you can pay for right now. We see that in the tiers of different health insurance. We see that in the ways that hospitals are distributed around neighborhoods. I mean, these things are systemic and they're interconnected. Having a solution like Medicare for All essentially negates that by saying it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much you can pay, everyone is going to get care, and it starts to equalize those things. That said, I think on an immediate basis, obviously we're not going to enact Medicare for All overnight, right? Like we're in the middle of a pandemic, we need solutions right now. And so I think it's important to note that when we're talking about suspending payment for testing or for treatment, we can't just say that insurance companies aren't going to bill for those things. That's not enough. Every time we make a policy solution, we need to be thinking about who's getting left behind. So when we say that like health insurance companies aren't going to charge for these things, we're leaving behind a huge chunk of Americans for whom the Affordable Care Act didn't create affordable health care. So I think we need a solution that provides treatment and testing for COVID-19 for all Americans, because ultimately one of the biggest things that a pandemic shows us is that we are only as healthy as the people who are getting the least care. As a society, we are only going to be as good as we treat the people who have the least access. We can't get through this and we can't stop the spread of this virus without making sure that everyone who is exposed can get the treatment, can get the care, can get the medical guidance that they need in order to stop the spread. So thank you.
Thank you, Bree. And next we have Betsy.
Yeah, I think that it is very alarming to see the disproportionate impact, although not surprising, of people of color of this COVID impact. Medicare for All, or universal single payer coverage, is the only thing that is going to help start to address those issues, both in the pandemic, but also going forward. You know, even lots of people now are talking about how difficult it is and how wrong it is to have a system of healthcare that is tied to our employment. 16 million people lost their jobs during this pandemic. 9 million of them have also lost their health care. So when people say before, you know, when they said Medicare for All was impossible, it was a pipe dream, all those things we heard, you know, and people love the insurance that their employers give them. Well, now those people don't have any insurance at a time where everybody needs it. So we need full coverage for everyone, which will start to address the disparities that we see. The reason that we are seeing so many people of color, indigenous populations, and low-income populations affected more by this is because of the co-occurring disorders and bad health outcomes that they have to start with because they haven't had access to health care. This is something that it's not a difference between right and left. It's a difference between right and wrong. We are the richest, most industrialized nation in the world. 32 other nations has figured out how to do this. It is immoral that we have not made a system that covers us. And I think that, as Bree and Lisa have said, it's because of the money that lines the pockets of the politicians that have them stay in place. And they don't ever have to live this, right? I live it every month. I figure out, should I pay my insurance premium or my taxes or my kids' tuition? And healthcare should not be based on that. It's dangerous to us as individuals. But as Bree said, now, if you're sick and you don't have healthcare, you now are going to make me sick. And we don't have paid sick leave, so people are coming to work. So we are exposing all of the ills of this system and why it doesn't work and why we must have universal, single-payer Medicare coverage for all as quickly as we can make it happen.
Thank you. And next we've got Tiffany.
So where I vary a little bit from some of the other candidates is I actually don't think Medicare for all is good enough. It still fundamentally functions like insurance. I'm not going to go too far down that path because it's not answering the immediate question. And the immediate question is, how do we fix these disparities? The problem is, as Bree mentioned, we have people who are left behind. And what that's going to take to change is fundamentally altering our relationship with the government. Right now, we have social services and supports that are set up as barriers to getting those services. They are there to screen you out and make sure that you're truly vulnerable, but it's using it against the folks who are vulnerable. So we should be doing direct aid at this point in time to individuals. That would certainly help. And not a one-time $1,200 payment for 10 weeks. That's just simply inadequate. It should be a reoccurring ongoing payment. But we should also auto-enroll anybody who loses insurance, doesn't have insurance, or can't handle their copays without having any additional work on their part in a wraparound Medicaid on a temporary basis so that people can just go get care. There are people who do not have access to the internet. There are people who cannot wade through this paperwork, and we are in a pandemic. We do not have time for the red tape necessary to deal with all of those applications. We know who our citizens are. We just need to take care of them.
Thank you, Tiffany. Our second question was submitted by a previous high school teacher studying public policy, planning, and management at the Muskie School of Public Service. We are already seeing measurable impacts of climate change, and the evidence is clear that something must be done. How do you see climate change impacting Maine in particular, and what policies would you propose to address it? And first off, we've got Betsy.
Great. So it's a great question. And yes, one of the silver linings of this pandemic is seeing what is happening to the Earth's atmosphere when we stop driving fossil fuel cars, while we don't travel as much. The ozone hole is shrinking, and we are seeing people in New Delhi are seeing the Himalayas for the first time in 40 years. And we see it here. We in Maine live so close to the climate crisis. Between our agriculture and our lobster and fisheries off the coast, we live it every day. And this is the crisis that we must address immediately. The Gulf of Maine is the most rapidly warming body of water in the world, the second most in the world. And so my grandpa was a lobsterman. And when I talk to lobster fishermen, they will tell you that their catches are going down and down as the lobsters keep moving further out and further up to get to colder water. A Green New Deal is absolutely the thing that we need to do. We need to take the $20 billion that we now invest, that we subsidize fossil fuel companies for with our tax dollars, and we need to invest that money in sustainable green energy production. And Maine could be the epicenter of this green energy production. between the wind and the sun and the ocean, we could do it not just for ourselves, for the state, but we could be a net exporter that would create new jobs, good jobs, non-exportable jobs, and deal with the climate at the same time. I think that is what we have to do. Again, a Green New Deal, I think we are going to face the worst recession and some of the worst job losses in our history after this pandemic. And a Green New Deal is going to do two things at once. It's going to address the climate issues, and it's going to provide good jobs that can't be outsourced to another country that are created here in Maine. So I think, again, we live this every day. It's not just who we are, it is how most of our economy is based. And unless we address this climate crisis, all the other issues aren't going to matter. So I think it's time to do it, and we have to do it quickly. We can't say, let's do it in 2050 or 2045. We have to do this, and the Green New Deal puts out a 10-year plan that is going to, again, create good jobs and really address climate crisis, and do it quickly because we don't have a choice.
Thank you. And next we've got Bree.
Yeah, so I also am a proponent of the Green New Deal. I think an important aspect when we're talking about climate change and we're talking about how we're going to address this issue is that the how and the why and the who is served is important. Kind of like healthcare, we're in a situation now where for-profit healthcare, basically making profit the end goal, of that economy leaves people out in the cold. And I think utilities and green power, it's kind of the same thing. If we leave this to for-profit industries, if we leave, fossil fuel companies in charge of the solutions of building new green power initiatives, what we're going to get is piecemeal solutions designed to create profit for that particular company building that particular piecemeal solution without a whole lot of regard for the system as a whole. Climate change is a global, holistic issue. So any solution that we enact has to be global, has to be holistic, has to look at the net reduction as the full picture. It's not enough to say, well, we reduced this much here in this one little corner, but the net impact might be an overall because of the way that we're transporting it. We need these things to be bigger than profit because climate change is bigger than profit. So when I talk about green power solutions, we talk about going forward, I think the best path forward involves some degree of public-owned utilities so that we are not focusing on the profit of changing the economy over, but we're looking at the public interest as the primary concern. And that also extends to kind of making this into an opportunity. Climate is a chance for America to be on the cutting edge of a new energy economy as the oil economy sunsets. So as we continue into kind of the oil crash that we're seeing, I mean, today the numbers were pretty staggeringly horrifying. As we continue into the collapse of the oil economy, we have an opportunity to build a new economy, and we have an opportunity to rectify some economic injustices that have plagued us as the oil economy has kind of started to crash in real time.
Thank you, Bree. And now we go to Tiffany. What policies would you propose to address climate change?
So I think that you'll hear from all of us that if the planet is fundamentally broken and not habitable, then politics don't really matter, that it has got to be the thing that's at the forefront. I am not signed on to the Green New Deal in the same way many other candidates are, because I want to see immediate measurable action in activities that we're doing now, bills that we're sponsoring now. And it can be from things that are unconventional, like working with local farmers to see if we can incorporate seaweed with cattle farming and see if we can work on emissions that way, to things that are more unconventional, and building in sustainability to every one of our products and every one of our programs. I once upon a time was a parks commissioner in Woodinville, Washington, and we built, for example, art into every single project and public works that we did. And we need to be doing that with environmentally sustainable projects. Every project we look at, no matter what it is, if it's infrastructure, if it's something where it's an incentive program with taxes, we need to be looking at how it impacts our environment. And we have some really great opportunities in working with green projects to rectify environmental justice issues and to truly take steps to make things sustainable. So I'd love to see us on big projects incorporating on a project-wide basis, but also looking at novel grants and seeing how we can work in supporting smaller farmers as well and smaller projects as well to really see what we can do to boost on both a micro and a macro level.
Thank you, Tiffany. Lisa?
Well, climate change is clearly the biggest security risk that we all face. It seems like it's COVID-19 right now in the short term, but we're all pretty aware that really climate change has been threatening all forms of life on the planet. And if something pretty serious isn't done, we could not survive as a species and take many others with us. This is ironic to me because the Pentagon gets the lion's share of the federal discretionary budget every single year. And they also, the Pentagon and its contractors, drive climate change. So defunding the Pentagon to address climate change through a Green New Deal, building green energy systems, would be a win-win for the climate. Weapon systems and war are very polluting. The Pentagon is the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels on the planet. There are 140 nations that emit less greenhouse gas than the Pentagon does in a year. And federal contracting is a very powerful thing. The original New Deal took federal contracts and awarded them to build things and create infrastructure that was needed at a time when unemployment was a huge problem in the United States. And one of the things that we're often told is that we must continue these Pentagon contracts because of jobs. But really, that is not true in the sense that building weapons is a bad jobs program. We would create 50% more jobs building a green energy systems like solar panels or a public transportation system for Maine to get us out of our cars than we create building weapon systems. So it's a win-win for the climate if we really think hard about diverting federal funds into more productive things than building weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for those informed responses. We now turn to the topic of the economy. This next question is provided by a graduate student within the Muskie School of Public Service. Wages have remained stagnant for decades, while cost of living has risen. This economic climate, intensified in the wake of COVID-19, leaves many Mainers, especially those in marginalized communities, trapped in financially vulnerable positions. As Senator, what policies would you fight for to improve economic conditions for those most affected? And we'll start off, Bree.
Yeah, so a lot of talk about minimum wage has talked about the fight for $15 an hour. The problem is, I think that argument is about 10 years old now, and $15 an hour doesn't get you a one-bedroom apartment in Portland. So we're at a place now where this figure that has been touted as kind of unreasonable for a living wage as a minimum wage is no longer even adequate to keep up. So I would propose a minimum wage set at a level tied to inflation to allow for the basic necessities of life. If you listen to FDR gave a speech, the second economic Bill of Rights, and I mean, the thrust of it is this. No company which survives on paying its workers less than they need to have not only the necessities of life, but the necessities of a good life, adequate food, housing, recreation, I think was included in that speech. No industry that lives off of those things should exist. And to drive that, I mean, I would propose a minimum wage tied to inflation and tied to other cost of living factors, but also there are other tax incentives that we can use to kind of to keep that flowing. I mean, if you look at, different taxation incentives on companies that, for instance, pay their CEO more than 500 times that of the average worker, we can look at kind of a back-end system to decrease, the actual straight up people aren't getting paid enough to live, but also disincentivize practices which make it incredibly profitable to be at the top as long as you're skimming it off from your workers. If we disincentivize those business practices and also set a baseline that people should be able to live on what they're making, I think that puts us all in a better position to be able to live happier, healthier lives. I mean, this is personal for me. I'm a median income Mainer. I'm out of work. I'm still not sure how I'm going to pay my bills depending on how long this thing goes. And I think in the wealthiest country in the world, that shouldn't be the norm for somebody who's at the middle. And it is. And I think we can do better than that. And I think having people, in positions to make decisions who are living those experiences, who are experiencing those, sets us up to be successful. Sorry, I just saw the hand there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. And next we will turn to Lisa.
Thank you. Yes, this is a major motivation for me to pursue this campaign. I've been a school teacher for 25 years in Central Maine. I live in the 2nd District. The families of the children that I work with have been struggling since long before the pandemic. They were, even if they had jobs, even if they were able to work, they were just barely making it, and only one small crisis away from, a complete economic collapse. So I see the stress on their children. I see how it affects their readiness to learn. And so the pandemic has made things glaringly obvious that I was pretty aware of even before that. I think that some kind of guaranteed income, I don't think that universal basic income is probably the best way to approach it. I think a negative income tax so that people who don't reach a certain level of taxable income receive money back from the government rather than universal basic income gives everybody the same check and then, taxes wealthy people. The wealthy people really need to pay their fair share of taxes. As a teacher, I've been paying about 28% tax rate, whereas very wealthy individuals often pay nothing. And I think that's a problem. A guaranteed minimum wage that is livable is also an extremely good idea. The cost of living has gone up steadily over the last couple decades, while real wages adjusted for inflation have stagnated. In the meantime, CEOs of corporations have seen their salaries skyrocketing. It's not an equitable system. It does not prepare all our children for being productive members of society that can bring their ideas and their wisdom to the collective process of solving our problems. The inequities of healthcare, of education access, of transportation access, and just access to nutritious food are glaring, even right here in the state of Maine. It's undemocratic, it's unsustainable, it's unsafe. And I think as a history major, when I look at what when I look at grave inequities in economics and where that path led in terms of government and social unrest, revolutions, this system really needs to change radically and fast, or I fear that we will see a collapse of the entire system and a lot more suffering as a result. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Tiffany?
So I work in family law, and it is gut-wrenching to watch what happens when you separate out households and see how vulnerable people truly are. And this was one of the things where we really need to change our relationship between the government and our citizens. Right now, all of the supports that we have set up are set up to make people not eligible for the services that they need. And we need to be reconfiguring those services so it's not a burden if you are genuinely poor, if you are disabled, if you are a veteran, if you have needs that aren't being met. We shouldn't be approaching people like they need to be embarrassed or immediately denied services and prove their worth when we already know they're vulnerable. So I think that we need to put a lot more work into both the services that we provide, but how we provide them, how that relationship is. You shouldn't have to go take 3 children into a DHHS office and wait for 6 hours with your 3 children to be able to get TANF or food stamps. It's an unreasonable burden that we've placed on our citizens. We certainly can address it in some areas, for example, addressing minimum wage. But I think the bigger issue that we have is that when we have the people who are vulnerable at the bottom, minimum wage doesn't even touch a lot of those solutions because they don't even have a way to get employed. So we really need to be pushing up instead of dealing with failed trickle down. And we really need to be changing those relationships so that we're mindful of human dignity and we're mindful of vulnerable people.
Thanks, Tiffany. And last we'll have Betsy.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that this, just our experience in the last month or a month and a half, right, shows exactly how fragile our economy is. You know, this idea that somehow the economy was booming before COVID-19 was based on a foundation of sand, right? People, if we look at what happens and we, you know, right now, the people who are benefiting from the good economy are people at the top. So we have 5 individuals in this country who make as much money, 5 individuals who make as much money as the bottom 50% of Americans. And yet we know how that wealth is generated, because the minute people stopped working, what happened? The economy collapsed. And so we do not value people who are essential workers, the grocery store clerks, the sanitation workers, the direct care workers, the nurses, the people who have generally not been valued in our society in terms of remuneration, in terms of what they get in their paycheck. Those are the people who keep the economy working, and yet they're not the ones rewarded by our system, either in their pay or in their benefits, and it goes to the people at the very top. So we have just passed, we passed a tax bill that Susan Collins was the deciding vote on, let us not forget that gave billions of dollars to the richest corporations and the richest people in this country. So that the top 10 companies in this one, the one that everyone's using now, many people are using to get their essentials, Amazon, makes billions of dollars in profits and pays 0 in taxes. So while Lisa and Bree and Tiffany and I and you are all paying 35% in taxes, the richest people in this country and the richest corporations are paying 0. And there is nothing that is fair about that. So we have to do tax incentives. We have to change our tax code so that we make it fair. We have to do a minimum wage that actually pays a living wage. We have to strengthen the ability of unions to organize. There has been a direct assault on the ability of unions to organize in this country and organize workers. And the only reason we have a middle class is because of our unions and our brothers and sisters in the union movement. So we have to do that. And we have to make sure that people are valued for the work that they produce. And we have to stop incentivizing companies that don't pay their workers, but also use their administrative fees like Walmart to tell people how to apply for public assistance. Because if you are working for Walmart and where they make billions of dollars, you should never have to qualify for food stamps or rent assistance, or any of those social services, which I'm happy to provide, but not for people who are working for one of the richest corporations in America.
Thanks, Betsy. Our 4th question was submitted by a public policy planning and management graduate student. Advancements in the global technology sector have outpaced our government's understanding of it and its capacity for hurting or helping our society. As a result, tech regulations have fallen short of protecting us from foreign powers interfering with U.S. elections and other cybersecurity threats. If elected, what policies would you support to help Americans equitably and safely transition into the 21st century? And first, we'll start with Tiffany.
Well, first, I think we need a Congress that understands technology. I don't know if you ever watch C-SPAN, but it's glaringly obvious that we have a fairly large segment of our House and Senate that are blissfully unaware of how technology functions. So at a base level, we should definitely be having people that are coming in and advising a little bit better. And we should be offering some training to people who are still in office that clearly don't understand what they're legislating. I also think that we need to be a lot more mindful of our digital technologies, a lot more mindful of privacy, and a lot more forward thinking about what we permit to be collected on us. We are putting ourselves in a position where our citizens have been commoditized, and it's going to lead to really, really bad policy choices. So, the market is great, but the market doesn't have a soul. The purpose of legislation is to create that soulful force in a market economy. And right now, we need to inject a soul that recognizes that technology has changed beyond our current capacity to legislate. We need to be moving to a place where we value privacy. We need to be moving to a place where we give citizens more autonomy over their data and their collection. We need to be moving to a place where we recognize that though we may have stopped having wars with foreign powers, they perhaps didn't stop having technological wars with us. And we need to be a lot more nimble in how we handle our technology, with going through and innovating, with offering tax breaks to smaller companies that can keep up and help feed that information into our larger groups. We have a lot of dated technology that we work with, and we should be looking to private partners that are putting the United States first and our security and our citizens first.
Thank you, Tiffany. Bree?
Yes, this is a great question, and it's one that I've done a lot of thinking about, because my understanding is that technology in terms of sort of cybersecurity and defense is currently being handled under the umbrella of the NSA. So like the director of the NSA is also director of cyber. I think that we need to break that out for a number of reasons. One being privacy and necessity for more oversight under the way that our government, or around the way that our government collects and uses data about citizens, but also we just need some dedicated resources to dealing with emerging cybersecurity threats and sort of the role of the internet as sort of a pillar in our modern society. So what I'd like to see have happen is have a position sort of equivalent to the Director of National Intelligence in terms of scope and authority, specifically for cybersecurity, and to have that office provide oversight, across all of the different, I think there's 17 intelligence agencies, provide oversight on all those agencies and their cyber data collection, but also to sort of monitor and address and build solutions and defenses to modern cyber warfare. Essentially, I think we need sort of a regulatory body, but also a dedicated arm to address those things specifically. It's a hard and scary thing. I mean, technology moves so quickly that there are threats that we haven't even thought about. And it's, when you look at the last election, it's threats that seem harmless until they're actually happening en masse. It's threats to the way that the public receives and perceives information. But also, I mean, it's not just something that happens abroad to us. It's something that happens from within our country. Like the idea that there are, paid troll bots from other countries influencing our election. Well, there's that. And when it happens from a domestic source and domestic people are paying for it, it's just politics as usual. So we need, sort of, this is kind of a separate but also related issue where we need greater oversight over the way that information is disseminated. We need greater insight over the way that it's collected, and we need greater insight over the way that we use it going forward.
Thank you, Bree. And now we go to Lisa. What policies would you support?
Well, one policy that I would suggest immediately is a consumer privacy law. Congress has been dilly-dallying on this for a decade or more. And in a free democratic society, we expect privacy in our homes, at work, and in the larger community. Unfortunately, I think there's been a steady erosion of expectations. I noticed that when I, 7-8 years ago, taught high school students about the revelations of NSA spying on all Americans and many people around the world, their reaction was kind of, why was that such a big deal? Why were people so upset about that? Their expectation was that they were being spied on in that way. I think that's dangerous. And I think that ethics and technology may not sound like they go together very well, but they need to go together well, and they can go together well. If we don't want to be cyber attacked, we, the United States, have to stop being cyber aggressors. We use cyber attacks on, every nation that's on that list of economic sanctions is also experiencing cyber attacks on their security system, utility grid, and so forth. We need to make sure that our posture of peace extends into the cyber world, because as we all know, that's a very important field of human activity. And it's a double-edged sword. It can be a great tool for democracy, or it could be a really dangerous thing used against democracy. So I think it's up to we, the people, to make sure that our representatives in government make it a force for good rather than for just profit. And making it just a force for profit is going to tend to erode the ethical side of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Betsy?
Yeah, and I think everyone's brought up great points about this, about the need for consumer protection. I love Bree's idea of having someone who is in charge of cybersecurity as part of the Defense Department or part of our national security system. But I want to pivot a little bit to talk about when we have, and Lisa mentioned this, when we have when this is a private system, a private for-profit system, they are making profit by selling our information. The more information they can gather, the more they can sell, the more they can hand it out to other people. And yet we also have, so we have that issue, we have the international issues on voting and our aggression and our being on the defensive posture of cyber attacks. But we also have people in this state who don't have access to the internet, who don't have access to any kind of technology that is going to allow them to interact with the rest of the state without the rest of the nation. Just during this pandemic, right, when we went to online learning, how many teachers, how many schools had students who didn't have access because either broadband doesn't reach them or they don't have the computers or they don't have internet in their homes. I represent mental health, community mental health folks. We had so many clients that we were trying to do telehealth with who didn't have minutes, who didn't have phones, who didn't have access to the internet. So that needs to be like a public utility. We need to have access to the internet just like we need to have access to water and to electricity in this country. And I think then we have a better base from which to regulate it and to make sure that it's safe, to make sure that we ensure safeguards, that we provide for net neutrality, for consumer protection and privacy, the things that we expect as citizens. So I think that it is a double-edged sword, but we have got to pay attention to our accessibility and everyone's accessibility to it, because as long as it's for profit, it's never going to be profitable in Maine for a company to go down to the end of every dirt road and make sure that people have access to the internet. It has got to be like a public utility, and that's the way it needs to be developed, and then it needs to be regulated in that way. And I think that will bring us a lot more safety than we currently have.
Thank you, Betsy. It looks like we've got time for about 2 more questions. Moving on to a hot topic during this election season, campaign finance. This question is provided by a member of the Graduate Student Board at USM. Campaign financing regulations have undergone scrutiny due to the influence of super PACs, dark money, and financial barriers of entry to elected office candidacy. As Senator, what policies would you advocate for, if any, to change how campaign financing works? Let's start with Betsy.
Well, this has been my life's work for the last 25 years. As many of you know, I worked in 1994. We did the original research to create the Clean Elections Act in Maine because we were horrified back then that a state Senate race cost $6,000 to run. Now, the most expensive race last year was about $300,000. But we see the influence. We've talked about it here in terms of healthcare, in terms of the Green New Deal and climate crisis. But this race that we are all involved in, the pundits in Washington are saying that this race against Susan Collins, when it's all said and done, is going to cost between $100 and $150 million. That's obscene. That's an obscene amount of money. We are not holding elections. We are holding auctions. The fact that one of our my primary opponents has already spent $10 million on this primary where it's predicted that 60,000 people are going to vote. That's obscene. And people who are donating to campaigns, they're not donating because they're nice people. They are making an investment and they want that investment to pay off. And that's going to pay off in terms of votes and more importantly, in terms of access and how you spend your money. When all of us decided to run, the consultants, again, would tell you that if you want to run for the U.S. Senate, you better make sure that you are planning, once you're elected, to spend 7 hours a day raising money from special interests. I will never do that. I promise I will never do that. And I have a 3-point plan to get money out of politics on the federal level. First is to overturn Citizens United, which is the court case. This would be a constitutional amendment, a court case that made corporations, people, and money speech. The second thing it does is create a clean election system like we have here in Maine on the federal level, because all of us would benefit from that. And it changes who can run and how we run. And the third thing it would do, and I think this is most important, is it would shorten the campaign cycle to 12 weeks, so that the need for the money, paying consultants in Washington tell you what to say and what to wear and how to say it and what to do, that's what costs all the money. And then putting negative ads on TV and negative mailers in people's boxes to say what's wrong with the other person. You could do this. You could have a forum and talk to people for as long as you wanted, but you can only raise and spend money for 12 weeks. And I think that's the way we have to get at money in politics. And we have to make sure that when people say they're not taking corporate donations or corporate PAC donations, they actually mean it.
Thank you, Betsy. Tiffany?
Well, I'm proud to say I haven't made a single phone call this entire campaign asking anyone to give me money for politics. I actually don't accept campaign contributions. And though, like Betsy, I would love to see Citizens United overturned, I just don't think there are the votes for that. So I do think there are some things that we can do as consumers of this information, and I do think there's some things that we can do with legislation. With legislation, I think that we can put some rules in place on equal airtime, what needs to occur in federal races, and then the states would need to replicate in their own legislation something similar, giving equal airtime and equal access to the information to the consumers and to each candidate. If you have equal access on media coverage, then you are going to have more egalitarian races anyway. You're going to have better candidate quality anyway. I think rolling out ranked choice voting in other areas really helps to have races where there is much more contrasting of positions and trying to earn those number 2 votes than there is the hate mail. And I think that as consumers of information, we also have a duty to push back a little bit and say, media, you need to be covering all of the candidates, not just with money. Right now, we have so much of a value on money that it's the only thing that gets press coverage. We have in this race at least 2 candidates that aren't actively fundraising, that are actively trying to put resources back in their community. And we need to make politics an exercise in how to support our communities, not how to spend a bunch of money on ads.
Thanks, Tiffany. Bree, what policies would you advocate for?
Yeah, so I agree with Betsy about Citizens United, about clean elections, about shortening the election cycle. I agree with Tiffany about expanding ranked choice voting. But ultimately, we have to kind of backtrack and figure out why those things are necessary or how we're in the position that we're in. And it's hard because these things aren't transparent. They're not easy to understand. They're purposefully sort of obfuscated. Like, you can say that you're not taking any corporate PAC money, but if you're taking money from so-and-so's idea PAC, like, the leadership fund for such and such a senator, and that PAC takes corporate money, you're still getting corporate money, which is what Sarah Gideon's doing. I wish that she was here so that I could address her directly about it. But, we're in a place now where you can hide this corporate money in all these different kind of avenues. And it's not just dark money, which comes in from like C4s, but it's money that is being funneled into better sounding names so that we get to a place where you're getting all this corporate money, but saying you're against it and sort of obfuscating the system. And ultimately, these reforms like overturning Citizens United need us to have people in office who didn't win by using those systems. When we have people who win by using the systems that we're trying to fight, they have no incentive to change it, which is why my campaign, we stopped actively fundraising in July of last year and started thinking about how we could use the seed money that we have to put it back into the community. And our original plan was to have a fundraiser in each of the 16 counties for local causes in hopes that just doing good things will speak for itself. Because ultimately, I think what we need is a culture change around elections. Right now, political viability is measured only by how much money you have. How much money you have is how legitimate you are as a political candidate. And that's a way to get a Congress that's more than half millionaires, which is what we have now. If we want a Congress that's representative of us, that's representative of the average American people, where people who don't have access to wealth or entrenched institutional support have an opportunity to make decisions about things that impact our lives, we need a culture change around what we value in our elected officials and what we value in our candidacies. So that's what campaigns like mine and campaigns like Tiffany's are trying to do. We are trying to essentially play a game that that's not being played elsewhere in hopes that that will make those reforms more appealing.
Thank you, Bree. Lisa?
Well, one of the great things about living in Maine is what a great election system we have here. I think that Maine's clean elections law could be expanded to the federal level all the way up to president. I think ranked choice voting could be expanded, and those would both be really significant reforms for getting big corporate money out of politics and reflecting the will of the people. I don't think it's realistic to pass a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United, and because we have a very strong First Amendment in this country, many of the controls on election political speech in other countries just aren't possible here because of our Bill of Rights. I do want to differ a little bit on how I feel about fundraising, because my grassroots campaign has so many donors of very small amounts of money, working people that have expressed support for electing a senator for People, Planet, and Peace. And part of that support is financial, giving what they can. I have pledged to neither solicit nor accept big corporate donations. So this is all real people, and some of them are watching this broadcast today, and they've invested what they could. And of course, volunteer time and other kinds of in-kind donations are significant as well. But when you're building this kind of political revolution, it's not a bad thing to have many people pitching in and saying, yeah, I believe in this too, and I'm going to support you with a donation that I can afford. So I think we need to make a distinction between real actual voters supporting a campaign with money and huge corporations that don't pay taxes and use their wealth to subvert democracy, making donations to a campaign. I think those are two completely different things. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Bree, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just briefly in rebuttal. I mean, I think the thing that I want to say is that we shouldn't have to pay to get the kind of representation that we deserve. Even if it is, hundreds of people trying to pitch in, my point is that they shouldn't have to pitch in financially their hard-earned dollars to make sure that they're getting quality representation. And that's kind of where we're coming from with it.
Thank you, Bree. Any response on behalf of anybody? All right, well, so that brings us to the final prepared question for the evening before we move to closing statements and a live Q&A session. This final question was submitted by a public health graduate student at the Muskie School of Public Service. In recent years, partisan gridlock in the U.S. Senate has made it difficult to pass legislation without a supermajority. What factors do you attribute to this, and what would you say your strategy would be to get legislation passed under these circumstances? And we'll start with Bree.
So gridlock is profitable. If you look at any fundraising email that you're going to get from either side, whatever part of the spectrum you're in, it's going to say that the other team did this terrible thing. Can you believe that? You have to give us money so that we can stop them next time. And once I thought about that, once that kind of hit me, every time I got a fundraising email, it got more and more grating, right? Because you get angrier and angrier thinking these people are profiting off of their inability to come to any decision. So I think when we're talking about where this comes from, we really have to look at campaign finance and go back to that. That said, there is, the profit is not just from the fundraising emails. The profit is from, the cooperation between senators and sort of the alliances of party and the ways in which, well, you'll get more funding for your campaign if you vote this way or if you hold the line with us this way. And so I think to some extent it's electing people who aren't going to play that game and who can show that they're not going to play that game. I really loved Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez started this kind of organization where it's no, I'm not paying my DCCC dues. I'm not paying the party for the privilege of being part of the party. I am part of the party because of these ideas. And, they can kind of take that fundraising conglomerate and put it where the sun don't shine, because this is about something bigger than that. And so when we look at kind of overhauling our campaign finance system and changing the way that these decisions get made, we're really looking at building in a mechanism for people who are going to go above and beyond the current system to make solutions that work for the people and not for the donor class that is funding these campaigns. These policy decisions all of a sudden become about policy decisions and not about how we can get as much of the systemic profit as possible back into our election so that we can be legitimate and win. So again, I mean, I'm going to default to culture change, which sounds kind of like a cop-out, but it's not. It's we need to change the way that we look at these issues and change who's making decisions about them, because as long as we have people making decisions about them who are benefiting from it, they're not going to change.
Thank you, Bree. And now we'll go to Betsy.
Yeah, I think that the idea of a supermajority and the filibuster has really slowed down democracy and made it impossible to get things done. And I agree with Bree that the not getting things done gridlock is very profitable. It's very profitable for the people who want to keep the system the same. The drug companies that spend $7 billion a year on the election cycle to make sure that they get to keep their outrageous profits while people don't have enough insulin, people don't have their life-saving drugs, people who want to keep the fossil fuel industry going, and keep their $20 billion subsidies that they get millions and millions of dollars from the Koch brothers operation and others. So and as I said before, it's not so much the money paid to vote a certain way. So much of it is paid for access and to make sure that nothing happens. Keep it the way it is. Can you imagine if we were going to design a healthcare system like the one we have now? Or if any of us worked, our job was to design a healthcare system that worked for everybody, we'd be fired. We would be fired. And you know what? Most politicians can't be fired because of the kind of gridlock that they have. That said, I want to talk to a minute about getting along. Every piece of legislation that I talked about, the Family Medical Leave, the Clean Elections Act, ranked choice voting, every single one of those big reforms that I have been a part of working on have come because we have bothered to talk to people and talk to people about their values. They were all bipartisan things in the legislature until recently, right? And the reason was because they reflected the values of the people that the legislators represented. And so we need to get back to being willing to talk to people about our values, to talk about core values. And in this campaign, I've talked to hundreds of Republicans and independents about tough issues, about choice, about gun control, about taxation. And we've been able to make progress and have conversations that move us forward because we appeal to the common values and we focus on what we can agree on and not on the political silos and the talking points that are developed by those fancy political consultants. And, I don't want us to move right. I don't want us to move left. I want us to move forward. And I think that is the responsibility of government and our elected officials.
Thank you, Betsy. And now we go to Lisa.
Thank you. So this is really a two-part question, if I understand it correctly. The first part being, what factors do I attribute the partisan gridlock to? The major factor to me would be that the same corporations fund both of the parties. And they have a huge interest in pushing a narrative of false dichotomy, by which I mean that choices are binary. It's either or. And, as we know, in terms of many aspects of life, being told that there's a false binary doesn't make it so. We were all told that about gender and then come to find out, hey, that wasn't actually true. I think the same is true of parties. Now that we have ranked choice voting in Maine, we have an opportunity to end that kind of, two-party gridlock because people can vote for their hopes and their values rather than voting their fears and that sort of, I have to vote for the lesser of two evils or the most evil will win. I can't vote for that person because they might be a spoiler and then the bad person will win. Ranked choice voting just does away with all that. And I think we're really, really lucky in this race to have that. As far as my strategy to get legislation passed under those circumstances, I think that one senator actually has a great deal of power. Besides the filibuster, besides introducing legislation, most things are passed in the Senate by unanimous consent because people that are in the pay of corporations don't want to go on the record as voting. So one senator can force a vote where people really have to commit and show how they're going to come down on that particular bill. I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage what an independent senator can do. Maine's other senator is independent, mostly caucuses with Democrats, but look at the independent senator from Vermont and how much he's done for the national dialogue and, for our understanding of politics, really. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And finally, we'll go to Tiffany.
Well, I think that we all agree that the conflict is profitable. My mother, who is a retiree on a fixed income in the greater Seattle area, who has never signed up for a fundraising email list in this race, gets daily emails about the Maine Senate race asking her for $3 like she is has a newspaper kid from Better Off Dead following her. And it's obscene. I don't hide that I'm an independent. I think the answer is twofold. Hire more independents for this job. We are not beholden to parties. And then we're all conditioned to dislike career politicians. Let's get some career legislators. Let's get people who show up prepared, ready to go, and work like their retirement depends on generating good law. Let's get people who focus on limited issues, making sure there's adequate time to review bills, being more transparent, and making sure they're communicating that information with constituents. Right now, the information we get out of Senate it's fluffy and it's a PR opportunity and it's not substantive. And we don't really know what's going into those bills that are released an hour before they're voted on, and they're hundreds of pages. And it's very difficult to hold anybody accountable when those are the rules that we're operating in. So get some people in the Senate that are willing to say, I'm not going to vote on that. If you don't give me enough time to review it and tell my constituents what I think, I'm not going to vote on it. I'm not going to vote on every bill being 1,000 pages. There is no reason for most to be 1,000 pages. Most bills can be done in 25 pages or less. There will be some that can't, but most can. So we need to have legislators that push back and say, let's change this system to one that everyone deserves.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, and the rest of the candidates for answering all of our questions. On behalf of all the students who submitted questions, we thank you. For the participants' understanding, all the candidates have honored our request to answer any questions in writing that we didn't get to this evening. And a quick reminder, if you would like to submit a question for our live Q&A session in just a few minutes, please submit them in the Q&A function right at the bottom. You'll see it on the bar below. And while you're submitting those questions, I'd ask that each and every one of the candidates give us a quick 2-minute closing statement to include your go-to quarantine hobby. And again, we'll go in alphabetical order by last name, starting with Tiffany.
So my unintentional go-to hobby has become a wide range of baking fails, which you can see on social media. I have catastrophically destroyed several cakes, and it's been a blast. We've been using baking for science and art for our children as a way to homeschool in that situation that we're all placed in with homeschooling. Follow me on Twitter. That's the easiest place to find me. It's at Tiffany Bond, and you can see my baking fails. You can also see my positions on a wide range of issues. If you have questions, I will answer them. Have a little bit of grace. I can't always answer immediately, but I try to get to most questions within a day or two. And let's look at how we can be shoving resources back to the community. I've talked about it just a little bit, but I don't do fundraising, I do Maine raising. So if somebody is inspired enough by my campaign, I ask them not to give me money, but to take the same amount of money that they would give me and either donate it to a local not-for-profit in Maine or shop at a Maine business, and let's help heal our Maine economy. It's more important than ever with this pandemic, and it's a great way to change politics. You know, we can get the ick out of politicking, so let's do it.
Thank you, Tiffany. Bree?
So So the thing that I miss most about kind of in-person appearances is this set of questions that I ask every group that I go to, kind of all over the state. I mean, I've driven the last quarter, it averaged 50 miles a day talking to people around Maine. And every group of people I ask, how many people in this room think that you can buy an election? And usually it's half to everyone in the room raises their hand. And then I ask, how many people in this room think that you should buy an election? And to date, I think there's been one hand total. And we talked about it afterwards and he said, oh, I see what you mean. No, never mind. And so I miss that because I miss seeing the way around the state that people know that what we have right now isn't working. And what I've been doing during quarantine is continuing trying to fix that. Our campaign's been pretty nimble, has been pretty adaptive. So I partnered with a number of different local mutual aid projects, and I've been working with those projects to fill their requests with our campaign funds. So for a while I was grocery shopping for people. As things got kind of more progressed, I've started sending out more grocery gift cards to people who were able to go to the store for themselves. And just sort of meeting those requests as I can has been really fulfilling for me because community care is self-care for me. But in addition to that, I'm also writing a quarantine cookbook of what you can do with shelf-stable goods, and I am making a leftist dance pop album. So staying busy to the best of my ability, trying to stay off of Netflix as much as I can, but we all get there.
All right, thank you, Bree. And next we'll go to Lisa.
Thanks. Well, my favorite quarantine hobby has been interviewing my campaign volunteers and making these very short videos, very short because I don't have much bandwidth here in the woods of Maine. And you can see the series of videos called Volunteer Voices on my YouTube channel. Lisa for Maine is the name of the YouTube channel. Today I published one with a high school volunteer, and I always ask them two questions. How are you doing in the pandemic? How has it affected your life? And I also asked them, why would you still be working on a U.S. Senate campaign in the middle of a public health crisis where you're scrambling to, deal with all these other needs? And their answers are very illuminating, from, retirees that are scraping by on their Social Security to high school students and everybody in between. I not only understand the importance of listening to constituents, I actually enjoy doing it. I do have a journalism background, and also I have experience as a union negotiator for teachers for their local bargaining unit. And in that job, basically, I had to listen to a large constituency, help them sort of shape a consensus about what our priorities were, and then build their trust that I would go to the table and be a spokesperson for them, not a loose cannon on deck who is just going to try to get what I needed out of the contract, but faithfully represent what they needed me to say and communicate both directions. Go back and say, here's what happened. Here's where we are next. What are your preferences going forward? I actually enjoy doing that kind of work. One of the things I've liked best about being a school teacher is kids make me laugh every single day. I really miss them a lot. That's been a hard part of the pandemic for me. So basically I would encourage people to go to my website. Our campaign website is Lisa for, spelled out F-O-R, Maine, with the spelled out MAINE.org. Check out our values. If they align with yours, please join us. We would love to have you on our team. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. And finally, we'll go to Betsy.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Thanks to my other candidates for being here and being so transparent. I do think that, again, how we run is how we're going to govern. And I think that Maine people are tired of having senators and Senate candidates who don't like to come out and be talked to, don't like to have unscripted conversations, and aren't willing to learn and listen to all of you. So thank you for those of you who are listening and for my other candidates. It is decision time. We have people in this state right now who are living, more people than ever in the state and country are living the very issues that we've been talking about. So as we have to go and co-create some kind of new normal after this, we are going to have more people with the more visceral understanding of what these issues are and the willingness to open the door and push for policies that I think many of us have been working on for decades. So I think that is an opportunity. You know, this is a crisis. A crisis is danger and opportunity. We clearly are very aware of what the dangers are. We see them every day, not just in terms of health, but in terms of all the fingers that this pandemic has into all the policies. But we also have this opportunity. And I think that we know now that we can come up with the money when we need it to do what people want and what people need. And so I think we need to push forward on healthcare, Green New Deal, ending student debt, all of those things. But I also want to know, I also wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about the job for those of you listening. Most of you listening, you are looking at the 4 most progressive candidates in this race. We have an opportunity to actually elect a progressive to replace Senator Susan Collins. But we have to be strategic and smart about it. So you get 2 bites at this apple. If you are an unenrolled voter, and I know many of you are, and believe me, I get it. I get why you would be unenrolled. You still have 2 bites at this apple. You can enroll now online as a Democrat, and then you can vote in the Democratic primary on July 14th for either Bree or I. I can be your number 1 and her your number 2, or her your number 1 and then me your number 2. And then we will have the most progressive candidate on the Democratic side. And then when we get to November, if you decide that you're more aligned with Lisa's policies or Tiffany's policies, that's great. You can vote for them as your number 1 and whoever's left as our number 2. We have a choice to actually be strategic and to make sure that a progressive person wins, but we have to be smart. And I know we are smart. I know we are in this together, and I know we will win this together. Thank you very much for being here. And again, if you want to work with us, betsysweet.com. I'm so grateful to everyone for tuning in, and let's do this.
Thank you so much, Betsy. So we've got plenty of questions coming in from viewers at home. I'm going to give them a few more minutes to submit those questions and have us go around and each candidate mention something they admire most about the other participants. So just a quick 1-minute response, and then we'll go into a live Q&A session. I guess we can go in the same order. Tiffany, you can go first.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got to do this. One of the things I love about ranked choice voting is we get to show off our strengths in contrast with the other candidates. So I love that Lisa is so determined that when she found that there were barriers to her having access to the ballot, she switched gears and rallied the troops and was able to get ballot access. And I think that was a phenomenal show of determination on her part. I love that Betsy has spent her whole career trying to help all of us. And she's so passionate and so committed. And I think that that is such an admirable quality. And I adore that Bree has decided to forego all of the theatrical fundraising drama and instead focus during the pandemic on direct aid to citizens, because that's what we want in representatives. We want representatives who put us before any of their personal ambitions, and that is so commendable.
Thanks, Tiffany. Go ahead, Bree.
Yeah, I admire that Tiffany is like, no, we're not playing this raise and spend campaign game. You know, I think that her campaign in 2018, 2019, the last campaign, you know, kind of set us up to think about how do we change this system. And it certainly was, you know, kind of a thing for me to think about, well, we don't have to play the game that everybody else is playing. And it's pretty inspirational. Lisa has incredibly strong and broad policy knowledge, and often looks at angles that I don't necessarily see, and gets me kind of excited to read deeper. And Betsy Sweet, this is, Betsy Sweet gives the best hugs. This is not a fact that most voters would get to know, but having Betsy Sweet kind of in this primary with me and seeing her kind of along the trail, I have come to, you know, the pit of your stomach feeling that you get when you're going into a tense situation is always immediately mitigated by the fact that I see Betsy. I know there's somebody else who sees all the angles of this issue that that I get to hug, and it feels like, okay, all right, well, we're out here fighting for the soul of the Democratic Party, and I'm not alone. So it's a good group of people here today. I'm really glad to see all your faces.
All right. And then Lisa, do you want to go next?
Sure. Well, what I admire about Bree is that you, Bree, often bring a perspective of marginalized people or aspects of a policy that I maybe didn't think of or they weren't as evident to me. I follow you on Twitter. I often am educated and enlightened by the take that you have on current events, so I appreciate that. Tiffany tweets like a boss. If I could tweet like Tiffany, she's not just articulate on Twitter. I mean, she uses Twitter so amazingly well, and it's really fun to be in touch with her on that platform as well. You know, Betsy's been a passionate advocate for so many things that I care about and that are near and dear to my heart here in Maine. And she's not a quitter. She keeps going. If she meets an obstacle, she finds a different path and keeps on fighting for those things that we care about. So I admire all of you very, very much. When I ran into Betsy for a First Friday in Portland when we were all still out and about, she gave me a big hug that Bree mentioned, and she said, "Isn't ranked choice voting great? We can be friends." And that is a true fact that we have a unique opportunity here. Tiffany already showed us the power of ranked choice voting to unseat an unpopular Republican incumbent. I live in the 2nd District, and you helped get rid of Bruce Poliquin, so I'll always owe you for that. But the demonstrating the potential of ranked choice voting in this race too, very important. So I'm really appreciative that USM gave us a chance to meet like this online. It's really been fun, and I've learned a lot. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa. Betsy?
Well, I just want to say collectively, I am so honored to run with all of you, and I admire all of you and all of us for the courage that we have. This is not what we are doing. Don't be surprised. This is not easy. You know, it's not people who just want to see themselves on a Zoom feed or have some personal, not Lisa, not Tiffany, not Bree. None of us is running for a personal ego reason because we want personal power or we want to be part of a system or we foresee a large political career in front of us. We are doing it because we care about Maine people, and every single one of you I know cares deeply about Maine people and the people who don't usually have a voice. And I just wanted, people know, and Tiffany knows, having run before as well, it's hard. This is hard work. A lot of it's exhilarating and fun, and you get to meet amazing people and amazing things. That's all the good part. And then it's also can be one of the loneliest jobs ever because nobody, except for those of us who are doing it, knows exactly what it's like. So I just want to say thank you for the courage. It would have been easy for all of us to step back and say, let the process just play out the way it is. There's plenty of things that we can do in our own lives, with our own families, with our own careers. And I think that being willing to step up to the plate and being willing, as Teddy Roosevelt said, to be in the arena, to dare to be in the arena, those are the people. We are the people. You are the women that I look to with so much admiration for being willing to put yourselves in the arena and to make the world a better place. And there is no greater honor than that. So thank you in my heart. And I don't get to see Tiffany and Elisa as much so now, and Bree, just, we always laugh. We can call each other. And that's a huge benefit on those hard days. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for that. That was really special, and I appreciate you all being so honest and vulnerable. Your answers were informative and refreshing, and this dialogue has been really, really important. It looks like we've got about 7 minutes before 8 o'clock, so if we can get through 1 or 2 questions, maybe with a 30-second response from some of our viewers at home, that would be awesome. Question number 1 comes from Ron Adams. He is a student at the Muskie School of Public Service. And it begins in May 2019, Governor Mills signed LD 1159, resolved to end hunger in Maine by 2030. If elected to the U.S. Senate, how will you provide leadership to Maine in this effort to build food security and end hunger? And feel free to answer and whoever wants to answer, it's to your own discretion. Betsy, go ahead, and then we'll go to Lisa.
Well, I think that, there is no reason that anyone in this country should be hungry. We have adequate food, we have adequate meat production, and we have adequate income to make sure that there is no one hungry. And yet we are not in that place. So I think there's a number of things we can do. The most immediate thing we can do is the reductions being proposed in the SNAP program, which is the food stamps program, which was designed not to help hungry people, but to help our agricultural farmers and make sure they got the subsidies that they needed. That's how it was started. But we have to make sure that that's accessible to everyone. We have to take away the prohibitions for people who are undocumented or people who are living in this country. Everyone deserves food. And I think there's another piece, which is we have to go to sustainable, regenerative agriculture. So we are producing nutritious food by small farmers regionally so that we can feed our regions. That is our answer to hunger.
Thanks, Betsy. Lisa?
Yes, I'm going to build on what Betsy just said, because Maine is in a unique position with a sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture. It's the only state in the nation where the average age of farmers is going down. And it's also a state in which ownership of farms by women is quite high. I think that our new Mainers are contributing to that as well. And they've been a great asset in local agriculture. So I think that supporting that Maine brand of agriculture is really important to feeding people.
Thank you, Lisa. Would anyone else care to comment? Go ahead, Bree.
Just super quickly adding, +1 for Betsy, +1 for Lisa, and also just an overall reduction in income inequality and all the things that we talked about with regard to that would also help address hunger. I mean, it's not that we don't have the supply, it's that people can't access it. And so making sure that people have the money that they need to live will make sure that they also have the food that they need to live.
Thank you, Bree. Go ahead, Tiffany.
I think we also really need to look at getting rid of work requirements and getting rid of children and household requirements for programs like SNAP. If you want people to be in the workforce, you don't punish them by making them hungry. You give them the tools that they need to actually go work. You can't go to a job interview if you're starving. You can't function if you don't have stable housing, if you don't have a mechanism to be able to keep that job. So I think instead of looking at our services like they're a crutch, we need to look at them as an empowerment tool to get people empowered to the best of their ability to be able to function in our society.
Sorry about that. Our next question comes from Nancy Golland. I have worked to connect the conversion of Bath Iron Works to a leader in producing alternative energy powered cargo ships, mass transit systems, and the like. But it became clear that the military budget is a sacred cow. Both parties vote to increase it on a regular basis. If you advocate reducing the military budget, how do you propose to break this iron triangle, government, military, and corporations? Go ahead, Lisa.
I think one of the biggest factors in this problem is information. The same corporations that sponsor our congressional representatives are also own many of the media outlets in this country. I think that most people in Maine and in the U.S. have no idea how much of their tax dollar goes to the Pentagon's wealthy contractors. I think they have no idea how much the Pentagon contributes to climate change. And I believe that if people had real information, that they would support the kinds of changes that we need to see, where we would redirect federal contracts to a Green New Deal, not throwing people out of work, in fact, increasing the number of good jobs available. And this is the conversion campaign is something I've worked on personally quite a bit. And I thank Nancy for raising that question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, me too. My second job out of college was working for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, where we put together that poster that many of you have seen. It would be a great day when the schools have all the money they need and the Air Force has to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber. And I think that's sort of the underlying thought. And I think we're right that conversion is Imagine if we spent in the world globally, as Bree talked about, if we spent the same amount of money globally fighting climate as we did putting into useless weapon systems. And again, I think Bath Iron Works, I've talked about this a lot. There's a great new pod in Denmark that has paddles on either side. It does kinetic energy. It's amazing. It's the same technology as building the warships that they're building. And I talked to the union folks down there, and they don't care what they build. They want to just make sure that they have jobs so we can increase the number of jobs. And it would be irresponsible of a leader to not be thinking 10 years out. But we're not going to keep building these warships. We're just not going to need them. It's going to be cyber wars and other things. And so we have a duty to look at conversion. And I think that's what a leader should be doing.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think, talking about transferable skills is certainly a way to do that. And also, I think, when we look at the military budget, there are these sort of black hole discretionary funds that aren't really itemized. Like I don't want to see a reduction in military budget where, military personnel are struggling to get what they need. People who are out, who are deployed need everything that they need. And I want to make sure that, that any effort to that effect is done in coordination with people who can tell us exactly how much is needed to get those things. But I think we do need to look at, the line items and really pick out those slush funds and make sure that nothing is sort of just floating around in the ether there. I also think we need to look at nuclear proliferation and the costs of that. Because it's not just a financial cost. It's also we can't tell other countries not to proliferate if we're still making more than everybody else. Like it's not going to work. Foreign policy can't be a do as I say, not as I do. So I think, kind of looking at our foreign policy culture and also looking at climate change as a national security issue and redirecting some of our military resources on a more direct issue like the Army Corps of Engineers, to working on climate change projects so that, okay, the military is still getting their money, but they're going to do the work that we need them to do. Instead of, we spend a vast amount of resources monitoring oil reserves. And I think that that's going to be a slower transition than we'd like it to be. But, looking at that as a transition that has to be done is important.
We never ask how we're going to pay for the military, which is part of the problem, right? I don't know if it's not switching over. But we never ask how we're going to pay for the military, and we need to be applying the same return on investment to all of our projects, including the military. One of the things that we really need to do is to not just go with return on investment based on superficial things. Our legislature has lost track of long-term costs and long-term solutions. And so we need to be forecasting our return on investment not based on this fiscal year, but based on 10, 20, 30 years from now. How does this benefit or harm our society? We're never going to get rid of all the pork projects. It's not going to happen. It is an expectation of senators that they bring home some of those jobs. But we need to be making sure that we're applying a return on investment to them and make sure that the military in particular has to prove its worth in the same way that all of the other projects do. And that's what it is to be responsible to your citizens.
Anyone else? All right, looks like we're out of time. Unfortunately, we were unable to get to everyone's questions. However, we will submit those questions or email them to all of the candidates so they have a chance to respond. And if you would like the response to your question from a specific candidate, feel free to email them or email Jeremy, and we will somehow get the answer back to you. I just want to give a big thank you to each and every one of the candidates and the teams for your collaboration. This has truly been an honor to be a part of. A big virtual round of applause for the students who submitted questions and helped put together this event. And to our viewers at home, thank you for your participation. And if Maine has had the chance to heal by then, I hope to see you at the voting polls where we'll be able to use ranked choice voting on July 14th for the Maine U.S. Senate primary. There's a link to voter registration info in the chat box below. And in consideration of social distancing, a quick reminder that Maine is a no excuse needed absentee voting state. You don't need a specific reason to receive an absentee ballot. Everyone can vote by mail. Also in the chat box, check out a link to a recording of this event on YouTube. And with that, I wish you all good health and a good night.